But having said that, would I trade a New York Times bestseller to have an intact family and have kids that don't have this baggage? 100% I would.
Yeah. So you go to Ohio State, and tell me about that experience.
It was terrific. Because I was on fellowship, I didn't have to teach right away. So I had a full year up front of just writing. And I wrote like gangbusters and started sending work out to literary magazines that I was excited about and placing work. And I felt like I had good momentum. Met people that have remained really important to me. I mean, my mentor there was Kathy Fagan. We're still good friends. And found a friend Katie Pierce, who's still my first reader. So she sends me poems for feedback. I send her poems for feedback. And we've been doing that for 23 years now.
That's wonderful, yeah.
Which is wild to think about. So I taught a little bit while I was there and mostly just wrote. And my thesis became my first book. So I wrote my first book while I was at Ohio State and then placed it as soon as I left.
So was it at Ohio State or somewhere before where you really started to think maybe I can make this a profession, or were you still not sure?
Not
if
even
you could?
yet. No, I still had no idea. I mean, even at Ohio State, I thought, well, what am I going to do next? And a lot of my friends were applying for PhD programs because they thought, well, maybe if, I'm going to get a PhD, that'll make me more attractive on the academic teaching market and I'll get a job. And I remember I taught a few classes and I was like, I'm not really sure this is something I want to do full time because as someone who is pretty introverted, there is a performative aspect to teaching and being at the front of a room and being the one who's talking and everyone is looking at you over and over and over again. It was a lot of like people facing time that frankly was pretty depleting for me. I do better when it's just me and my work. And so I got a job at Gettysburg College straight out of Ohio State teaching undergrads. So I moved to Pennsylvania for 9 months and I taught 3 classes a semester, all creative writing. And I came back to Columbus after that and I hadn't written anything in 9 months because I was writing copious notes and all of these students' poems and had meeting with them and, organizing the reading series and doing all this other stuff as a faculty member. And that's when I decided that's not what I'm going to do. I'm not going to apply for tenure track jobs. I want to come home and I'll just find a job. And so for years I worked in publishing. I worked in educational publishing at McGraw-Hill. I worked Highlights for Children in Zaner Bloser. And it was, for my temperament, a better fit because I could sit and work mostly quietly one-on-one when I wasn't in meetings, just me and my computer. And editorial work really suited me for that reason because it was quieter. And it didn't stress me out in the way that prepping and teaching kind of stressed me out because it was performance.
Yeah, it is stressful. I used to teach at Ohio State and they're like kids, but you still feel like it's your job to perform. Yeah. And it is stressful. And there's some people that just love doing it. And I imagine you do it long enough,
it's easier now for sure. Yeah.
Right. But there is this kind of like conundrum where, people feel and not just feel like have to make an income. And yet if you're busy, it's much harder to have the energy to do the thing that you really want to do.
Yeah.
And so I don't know if you have any thoughts or advice on or how you navigated that.
Yeah. It's funny. I actually find that the more I have scheduled, the more writing I do. And I don't know what that is. I think it's something where I sense the time squeeze. And so I kind of fiercely protect pockets of it for creative work. But if I have nothing but time, which doesn't happen very often anymore, it's hard for me to focus. Like if I've got a whole day, it's so amorphous. It's hard for me to focus. But if it's broken up into little bits, I'll be like, oh, I can write between 2 and 5. So that's actually been useful for me. Is having structure sometimes is the thing that gets me to do what I'm doing.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're at this point in your career now, and are you at this point with your ex-husband? Have you started your family during this period of time?
Yeah, we moved in together right when I was starting graduate school, so 2000. Through grad school, stayed together while I was in Gettysburg, so I just would like commute back and visit every once in a while. And then I worked in publishing and like worked a 9-to-5 job and then quit my job when I got an NEA grant in 2011. So I've been working self-employed from home for the last 12 years. And we were together through that decision too.
And just curious, because you've shared so much of this story, but when you think back on how you met and kind of those early years of your relationship, do you think back on it differently? Were there things that you maybe look back in hindsight and say, there was something there, I wasn't, mature enough, or were you, really felt like this was like a wonderful person thing? I mean, not that he's not, but the experience felt really beautiful to you at that time.
Yeah. I mean, I think my thinking about it now is like I made the best decisions at the time based on how I felt and what I knew, and so there isn't actually a lot of hindsight that I think would have gotten me to a different outcome. I don't know that there was anything that I quote unquote missed, I think more often than not, and I see this with, I mean, honestly, so many couples, especially when you get to your 40s and 50s, the short answer is I think some people are really lucky to grow together if they get together in their early 20s, as we did. And some people grow in different directions. Yeah. And I mean, that's a way oversimplification, as you know, you've read the book, but I do think at its core, there are the people who are still together in their, 40s, 50s, 60s who met when they were in their teens or 20s, either grew in similar ways or have temperaments or their life sort of worked out in a way that they were able to kind of give each other space to sort of change over time.
Or maybe just wrestle through it.
Yep.
It's
a lot of work.
Still, come out on the other side.
Yep.
But yeah, there's definitely, those different paths. And, you've talked about this, but I'm curious, you being now a mother at that point, and him having the like professional career, you being a writer, you talked a little bit about how hard that was for all of you.
Yeah.
Right. And I thought, it would be helpful just to hear you, in person kind of share like really what that experience was like. You mentioned that after, Good Bones, your marriage was never the same, right? So there's that piece, but like before you get to that point, what was that like?
Well, I mean, I think anybody who, if you've got 2 working parents and then suddenly you have a child and then suddenly you have 2 kids, there's a lot of recalibration that has to happen. And a lot of the recalibration, I think, was more me recalibrating because I had the more flexible work situation. By the time we had 2 kids, I was working from home. So when you're the work from home parent, even if you are, I was freelancing for publishers. So I would stay up late working a lot because I had an insane amount of deadlines in those early years. I didn't have, depositions or trial or the things that he had on his plate that were not movable or flexible. That was a very much like an 8 to 6 job. Whereas mine, as long as I got my deadlines met, I could work from 8 p.m. to midnight after the kids were in bed. And so if someone was sick and couldn't go to daycare, if someone had a doctor's appointment or a dentist appointment or a class party or
it was you.
It was me.
Yeah.
And honestly, I wanted it to be me.
Yeah.
So there's part of it where it's like, yeah, you can say, all of this fell to me. But the whole truth is that, yes, it fell to me. And I wanted it to fall to me. It made more sense. I wanted to be there. My mom had done all of those things.
Right.
So I was sort of also reenacting my own upbringing in a way that became more difficult after Good Bones went viral because suddenly I was more in demand. And my career, I had the kind of chance to lean into it in a way I hadn't before. And that didn't look like my mom's life. And so I was trying to sort of retrofit a sort of, frankly, like 1950s, 60s, stay-at-home mom parenting style onto the sort of growing pains of my job sort of taking up more space and then also needing my partner to flex down in some cases in order to fill in. And that's when things sort of the strain kicks in. And I think my situation is a little bit strange because obviously it's, not everyone's parenting story or marriage trouble story has like a viral poem and like Meryl Streep reading it. So there are all these like pieces that make it seem kind of novel, but really it's so many people's stories.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. I'm just sitting here listening and thinking about this because this viral piece, there's not as much of a transition when that happens.
No, there's no planning.
Yeah. And it's like, but there you are. And you don't want to miss that because it's kind of what you've always wanted. I think, right? Like, I mean, you might not even know what it is, but like just the idea that your work was being so well received is got to be part of what you want out of the work that you do, right?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
And sort of that feeling of like, holy moly, maybe I get to do this quote unquote for real.
Right.
Maybe this won't be a side gig.
Right. The opportunities are now there.
Right.
That you've
so
always
strike while the iron
and,
is hot.
Yeah.
But how do you strike when the iron is hot when you have a 2-year-old and a 6-year-old and your spouse has a full-time job that's really demanding?
Right.
And it was just a lot to sort of manage. And there wasn't a way to, you're right, there wasn't a way to plan for it. It's not like when you're going up for promotion and you can have a talk with your spouse like, look, I want to be on this board and it's going to take time in my evenings. How do we manage it?
Let's talk about it.
Right. Or you're going to go up for partner and it's going to mean this. How do we talk about it?
Right.
When you wake up one morning and your life has sort of blown up overnight, not because you applied for something or it just happened to you. It was a quick scramble to think about, okay, what is possible now? And I'm not sure I did everything right.
Oh, I'm sure. I mean, I think, you made that pretty clear that like it was messy and hard. And, like you said, you do the best you can at every moment. But when it's so new and so foreign, sure, it's going to be a little clunky.
Yeah.
But you did say that was sort of the point where the marriage, really was never the same. No,
it wasn't. And I think we all want our partner to be our sort of biggest cheerleader. I think that's what we want.
Yeah.
And so when I didn't feel that way, that was really hard. And then I thought, okay, so now how do I make this work? Because I feel like these things that I'm really excited about are chafing this other person. And so I can't, like I stopped, and I write about this in the book, I stopped sharing good news. If I got something published or like when I got a speaker's agent or if I got invited to teach or travel out of state, I felt like, okay, how do I break this news as opposed to how do I share this amazing, like, let's go out and celebrate.
Yeah.
And there, for years we did celebrate wins together, both of our wins. And then I feel like something happened in there where it stopped being cause for celebration and sort of tipped more into inconvenience and strain. And so it was hard. I think about that now and I'm like, maybe that experience would have felt really different for me if I hadn't been also negotiating all
someone
of this
else's
stuff.
Yeah. Interesting. You talked about then, obviously the affair happens and, but when you're just hearing you describe this part, it feels almost like there was, the foundation was not strong. Then the viral thing happens, right? Now you have this whole new dynamic. You're not getting what it's the perfect storm.
Perfect storm.
Right. And then that becomes the thing, the affair. Not that that's excusable, but it like is the outcome of what felt like this perfect storm, right? In part. Do you see it that way?
I mean, I really do see it as a perfect storm of a lot of things went wrong. And maybe, I talk about this in the book and sort of puzzle through it myself. Like maybe one of those things would have been survivable.
Right.
How do you ever know? It's really tempting to do sort of a post-mortem on a relationship and think, okay, so here are the things that went wrong, right? Like just like you would after a surgery that went horribly wrong and you lost the patient. And you think, okay, well, this happened, this happened, this happened. What was the event that was like the one that we couldn't come back from? And the short answer is, I don't know. Like, I don't know what combination of those things, had they been different, would have been survivable for us as a couple. I just know that all of them at the same time together was not
too much. It was too much.
It was too much.
I mean, there is a thing that is, something that, I've heard therapists, psychologists talk about that, there is a point in marriage where it can just be too much. It can just be broken. It's too hard to repair.
Yeah. I don't know how do you find your way back?
How do you find your way back? Yep. Yeah. You might not be able to.
Yeah.
And I saw somebody say something about how you took lemons and made it into lemonade and add vodka. I forget who it was. I read it somewhere, right?
Yeah.
But what struck me more about that was, I think your reaction was, and I didn't want any of this.
No.
Right? Like, so it sounds like this sort of empowering, badass, courageous thing to do, which it is, right? You made lemonade and you did put vodka in it and it's awesome, right? But like, you didn't want any of this. Your kids didn't want any of it. I mean, this is not what you were wanting. And what I was curious about, we talked a little bit about like the suffering and the angst, right? But, I guess sometimes I think like spiritually, my belief is like, it's not always how we want it, but it's maybe, how we need it. I don't know, needs the right word, but like, it does feel like there's some, again, this is just sort of my spiritual beliefs, like a divine perfection to it. Like it does, I mean, it's horrible, it's painful, it hurts, but it does allow you this material to work with. Yeah. And I'm not gonna, pontificate on like what it feels like for the kids. I lived in a divorce household. My parents got divorced when I was 10. So I know what that's like. It's very traumatizing and difficult.
Yeah.
And, as a 48-year-old, I can say like, served me really well, but I didn't know that for, decades.
Yeah. And you also don't know the person you would have been without it.
Right.
I mean, it served you really well for the person you are now.
Right.
Yeah. I wish spiritually I had that feeling of like, it all turned out the way that it's supposed to. I actually don't believe that personally, but I also don't believe that it happened wrong.
Okay.
I just think it is what it is.
Yeah.
And so, but having said that, would I trade a New York Times bestseller to have an intact family and have kids that don't have this baggage? 100% I would.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't want the lemons. I did my best with them for myself and for my family. And I do think I made things that I'm proud of from it. I made things that I know from the emails and DMs that I get that are helping other people process their own big upheavals and losses. And that makes me feel good, but not good enough to want to like take the hit for it.
Yeah. Well, and let me just kind of dig in there a little bit with you. So, not necessarily about the New York Times bestseller, not necessarily about like, would you do it again? But do you see how it did really help make you who you are today? And, do you take some comfort in that? And honestly,
I wish the answer were yes, but I think my reaction to you is sort of my reaction to myself, which is I don't know who I'd be without this trauma.
Yeah.
I would love to meet that woman.
You wonder.
I would love to meet the woman who hasn't gone through any of this and is still writing. And I would love to see what that woman would have written over the past few years, because it would have been books. It just would have been different books.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have written Keep Moving.
Right.
Many of the poems in Goldenrod wouldn't exist, although many of them would.
Yeah.
Certainly You Could Make This Place Beautiful wouldn't exist without all of this stuff. But the person I would be without 5 years of stress and litigation and wondering what on earth happened to my life, and then the subsequent writing I did from it would just be something else.
Yeah.